What's good? It's Woog. I attended Jermell Charlo versus Brian Castano 2 last night at the Dignity Health Sports Park in Carson, California. Carson's a suburb right outside of Los Angeles. But it's actually a very, very good boxing venue. Like, there's not a bad seat in the house. It's small enough to where, whether you're sitting in like the front section, which, I saw like LL Cool J in attendance, or if you're in the middle section or further back, you've got a pretty clear shot in the ring. I've attended a UFC event before. It was Cain Velasquez versus Junior Dos Santos the one where Dos Santos knocked out Cain Velasquez. But one thing about looking in a cage, you're looking at two fighters inside and behind the cage. So the way that the cages are working in terms of the cross-cutting pieces of metal versus three ropes that you have to look through to be able to see the fighters and the action in a boxing ring, it's just night and day. And plus, again, it's a small enough venue to where you could get a really nice shot. So I haven't seen the broadcast itself, but man, what a fight. Like, I thought Charlo was controlling things early, like the first round and a half, behind a jab, and Brian Castano wasn't coming in as hot. But damn, boy, like by the second, third, fourth round, was he not coming in regularly and getting, Charlo somewhat pinned up against the ropes and in the corners? I really felt like for Charlo to have more success in this rematch, that he had to minimize the amount of time with his back along the ropes. Well, it turns out, and we've known that Charlo is a dangerous puncher from off the ropes, but we also knew that that's where Brian Castano would be able to launch most of his offense. So there were moments, certainly, where Charlo did have his back against the ropes, which would allow for these, extended exchanges. And that was, you just had bullets flying from both fighters. And Charlo's kind of like, moving, trying to put his head down because it's obviously Castano with more of the volume. And, Charlo was rolling with some of the punches and partially blocking some of the punches and moving to where some of the punches went above his head or just missed entirely. But, Castano was landing a lot of clean offense. And quite frankly, I thought that by the fourth, fifth round, there were moments, certainly by the sixth, where Charlo looked like, not like he was hurt or on the verge of getting knocked down necessarily, but I thought that, he was buzzed by some of the cleaner shots, the ones where he wasn't really rolling with. And by the way, even in the center of the ring, where you would think that Charlo's got, most of the advantage, which if he is jabbing, especially when he's jabbing to the body, he is controlling most of the middle of the ring action. But I do think that Castano has an underrated straight right hand. Like, when he leads with the right hand, I thought he was having some success against Charlo and getting Charlo to start to move back again closer towards the ropes. But again, Charlo even went along the ropes. Very dangerous fighter, kind of like Roy Jones Jr. was pretty damn dangerous off of the ropes too. But that is not where Charlo was going to be absorbing the least damage. That is, in fact, where Charlo would be getting hit the most because, again, Castano feels more emboldened to let his hands go when Charlo is there. But something happened. There were a couple moments, once in the third or fourth, and then once closer to the seventh and eighth, where it seemed like Castano became more reluctant to start coming in again. During some of those exchanges, Charlo would throw that short, not short compared to Castano's punch, but still shorter than if Charlo was to really loop the left hook. But he would throw a hook in some of those extended exchanges to where towards the end of the exchange, you could see Charlo land pretty flushly against Castano, and then you would start seeing a different reaction out of Castano. It wasn't the, hey, I could take a million of these type of energy. It was like a, damn, let me slow the hell down, take a step back maybe and reassess my entry point type of energy. And by that point, I'm like, ooh, maybe Charlo has then turned the tide back into his favor, because I thought that it started to kind of get out of hand for Charlo a little bit in, the fourth, fifth, and sixth rounds. But boy, the more Charlo was mixing up the jab high and low, especially like he could not afford to forget about the body in this one, and that paid dividends in this fight. And it was obviously keeping Castano from jumping in as frequently as he wanted to. Like, you might be watching a fight and think that it's almost a waste of energy to throw a jab to the body, but think about it. If you throw three jabs up top, Castano with his high guard to begin with, and if you're trying to jab through somebody's high guard like 100 jabs around, you're gonna suffer arm fatigue. So it's like, what's the point in continuously purposely jabbing up high if Castano's guard is right there to, kind of pick the shots off. And granted, some of those jabs were piercing through the high guard, especially when you started getting later into the fight. I thought very early, Charlo was having some success with the 1-2, and then later on, Castano's high guard was a little bit weaker because his arms were a little bit more tired, his legs were more tired, his body was just not as durable, by the 7th and 8th round as it was, in the 3rd round, 4th round. So I thought that to maximize effectiveness, Charlo would have to mix in, 3 jabs up top, because again, you don't want to keep on jabbing into a high guard, because although some of them cut through, you are tiring your arm and shoulder out because you're basically punching in water by that point. But if you mix it up with the jab to the body, again, it might not look like it's doing much as we're watching the fight, but believe me, some of those jabs feel like a piercing knife right into the belly or just above the belly area or even lower belly. Keep in mind how Jermell Charlo stopped Jason Rosario. Wasn't that one of the most awkward looking jab finishes you've seen in a fight? I mean, Rosario hit the deck and he just started writhing in pain, like making no sort of real attempt to get up because it was that painful. Not to say that that's the impact that Jermell Charlo's jab to the body was having against Castano, but it was certainly effective, especially to break the monotony when it seemed like Charlo was trying to move around the ring, but Bryan's pursuit and his effectiveness in cutting off the ring to then prompt another extended exchange, because that's what Castano was looking for. He was figuring, okay, if I could get past, Charlo's jab and then that first right hand or left hook, now we're in a phone booth. I've got the shorter arms. I could let these punches go. And that's where you started seeing Charlo look like he was taking more fire up top. So when you mix the jab to the body into your whole repertoire and you start doing it often, and you'll have one of those exchanges, or even after you hurt the guy, to then go back to the jab high and then low to the body. When you mix it in at these different times, it introduces reintroduces the pain element of the fight, because sometimes when fighters are just taking shots that they are more or less predicting are going to come, they're able to absorb it in a way where it's not as hurtful, straight up hurtful, as a unexpected jab to the body. That's why you saw Floyd Mayweather using it in almost all of his fights. It was one of his most effective punches, as effective as his check hook is, as his straight right lead is. When Floyd Mayweather, especially when he would throw that, jab hand out and probe high and then move the fist low to touch the body, damn, that's effective. And you could see how it was stunting Castano's pursuit. So the more it seemed that Jermell Charlo remembered, don't forget about the body. And then obviously in those long exchanges where he does catch Castano cleanly and then go back out, circle, and keep jabbing again and then to the body, it seemed like that was starting to have a more impactful role in the fight as it got into the 7th, 8th round. Because again, I thought Jermell Charlo reestablished, some control in those later rounds. And then certainly you started seeing more visible evidence that Castano was in fact getting hurt in the fight. But damn, what an accomplishment. What a fight. It was so dramatic, with the audience. I mean, there was a lot of, Argentinian flags out there. Definitely a pro Castano crowd. And so, if you listen to the entries, which I enjoyed both entrance music for both Charlo and Castano, but you heard the boos cascading when, Jermell Charlo was introduced. So you add that element. I thought that by the, because I'm not watching the telecast, I don't see what Steve Farhood, I think that would be the unofficial scorecard, either him or maybe Larry Hazard Jr. But I haven't seen the broadcast, so I haven't seen how the judges were actually scoring, or the unofficial judges were scoring the fight. But I thought that Castano was up on the cards like through 6, through 7, because I thought Charlo probably won the first round, and then maybe like two other rounds out of the next 5 or 6 rounds. So I thought that Castano would be up by like 1 or 2 rounds. But then I thought that, 8th round, 9th round were way better for Jermell Charlo. But man, that was a dramatic fight. And what an accomplishment to become undisputed champion at junior middleweight. It's going to be interesting to see what Jermell Charlo does next. First of all, Like, I've had him in my top 10 pound for pound, even after the draw with Castano, basically because of how he earned those first 3 titles and some of the quality wins that he's had over the years. He beat like Vanes Martirosyan, Gabe Rosado early in his career, and then he would obviously beat, Tony Harrison in the rematch, Jason Rosario, knocked out Erickson Lubin, Charles Hatley, a lot of quality wins, John Jackson, and so many of those wins coming via knockout, especially in this second act of Jermell Charlo's career. But I would also understand those who didn't have him in the top 10 because of how close some of his fights were. And also, I just think that it works to his disadvantage, unfortunately, being the smaller twin of twin brothers. I think there's a lot of conflation. I think it even takes an extra effort to understand the different personality types between Jermall Charlo and Jermell Charlo. So, I was making those distinctions pretty early, understanding the fight stylistic differences. Like, I think Jermall Charlo has historically been a better round winner than Jermell Charlo. And then early in his career, Jermall Charlo was knocking out just about all of his opponents. I think he's had a way less impressive 160-pound career thus far. But yeah, Jermell Charlo, I could understand how he would continue to fly under the radar. But, I had him in my top 10. I had him like at 8, closing 2021. I think I even had him in the top 10 closing 2020 after his win against Jason Rosario. I already had him in my top 10. But now I think he probably goes up another notch, maybe lands at 7 pound for pound right now. But it's going to be interesting because I want to see if he's going to defend the title against Sebastian Fundora or if he's going to go to 160. I don't know if I love his shots at 160, depending on who he's fighting. He does have it's not totally feast or famine, but because of his lack of consistent output in a lot of his fights, he does tend to lose more rounds than some fighters who are just more adept at winning the minute by minute stretches per round. So yeah, I'm going to keep my eye on that situation to see if he defends against Sebastian Fundora. And I want your guys' take, like, who wins between Jermell Charlo and Sebastian Fundora, who just had a sensational performance, brutal performance against Erickson Lubin. But yeah, I can't wait to get on the live chat with y'all and talk about this, in a day or two. I'm going to put the alert out there. But man, I have only been to a couple, fights live in my life. I'm glad that I chose to go to this one. I didn't even choose to buy the tickets until the day of. And, again, because of the venue, this isn't like one of the, huge arenas where if you have like a less than close spot, it's difficult to see the action. Nah, you feel like you're really close to everything in that formerly the StubHub Center, formerly the Home Depot Center, same place where Timothy Bradley fought Ruslan Provodnikov, and I think it's the same place where Shane Mosley fought Antonio Margarito. I think it is. I have to double check, but there have been a lot of good fights in that, StubHub Home Depot Center, now called the Dignity Health Sports Park. I think Paul Williams and Sergio Martinez. And Paul Williams fought somebody of note in that arena. But yeah, very good venue. And I felt like I was witnessing history a bit, with Jermell Charlo becoming the undisputed champion at junior middleweight. So, I would like to think that he's fully out of the shadow of Jermall Charlo. Jermall Charlo was, the champion at 154 before Jermell Charlo was a champion at 154. But now, because of Jermell Charlo's fight-by-fight schedule, his willingness to get in there with all of the best, generally the best in his division, and just leaving no doubt in terms of who's the best in the division. Like, we didn't ever see him fight Jarrett Hurd or Julian J. Rock Williams, some other guys, Landy Lara, who the Charlos are pretty close with Lara, so I wasn't expecting that fight to go down. But it would, again, be interesting to see if Jermell Charlo defends his belts against Sebastian Fundora, who's just looking he's looking like a handful, given his physical dimensions, being 6'6" at 154, plus his punch volume. Just an absolute nightmare if you haven't developed a game plan to specifically deal with that set of skills. But yeah, let me know what you thought about Jermell Charlo versus Brian Castano 2. How did you have like the round by round scoring? Because again, I haven't yet seen the broadcast, so I would like your take on who seemed like they were asserting control in certain rounds. Because again, like through 6, 7, 8, I thought that we were on our way to a Brian Castano win in the rematch. I thought Brian Castano was about to become undisputed champion because of how many moments he started to have where it looked like he was finishing rounds strong, kind of pressing the issue and getting Charlo's back against the, against the rope line where Charlo has less room to move. But even in those exchanges, you could see Charlo trying to move. It just seemed like despite even the movement and trying to get a hand up, that a lot of those punches were getting through and having an impact on Charlo, initiating him to want to clinch in a few different moments, clinch and then continue to move. Now, the movement I thought was deliberate and obviously a part of the game plan. The clinching is usually, to me, more reflective of wanting to slow the pace down, wanting to kind of either regain yourself, just kind of recenter yourself in the fight. So I wasn't sure how to interpret a lot of those punches landing against Charlo, but it did cross my mind a couple times that maybe we were going to get a Brian Castano stoppage of Jermell Charlo. That's what it seemed like just watching the fight there. But yeah, let me know what you thought about it. I mean, that was a hugely important fight. I'm so glad when great fighters are fighting the fights that matter. That's all I want as a boxing consumer, a boxing fan. But yeah, congrats to Jermell Charlo, the undisputed champ at junior middleweight. And also, there's really something to be said for carrying your power late into fights, isn't there? I mean, man, you want to talk about heart. Like, I just felt like that was such a rugged fight to have to go through. Like, you saw both guys, like, at different points of the fight, showing kind of like the body language of, yeah, I'm affected. I'm affected, but I'm going to continue to dig in and try to do what I need to do. Hats off to both guys, but damn, the fact that Jermell Charlo now has, he's got several late round knockouts. If you think about it, Tony Harrison, that wasn't an early knockout. In fact, very few. Charles Hatley, Erickson Lubin, those are really the only early knockouts that are coming to mind of recent years. But the late ones, Tony Harrison, this one, Jason Rosario was more like middle rounds. But to go through a pretty grueling fight where you're moving a lot, you're getting roughed up a bit. There are a lot of exchanges where, you're taking punches, giving punches. And then just with the excitement of the audience and just all of the stress and adrenaline, everything that those fighters are carrying in the fight, that you would think that by the later rounds, you're kind of zapped of energy, right? And so what happened? It looked like it was in an exchange and Jermell Charlo threw a pretty tight left hook. And it wasn't a delayed reaction from Brian Castano. It's like he stood there for an extra second with his high guard. It looked like first Jermell Charlo threw a right uppercut, which, I thought, that would be something that he should probably work into the mix, because Brian Castano is coming in like this. Charlo is trying to throw the left hook, but he's only throwing the left hook as a counter as Castano is coming in. Sometimes he would throw it as a check, but usually it would come after Castano throws his first punch or two and the bullets start flying. But I thought that maybe a well-placed uppercut could also be effective. But, it's often the case where it's so much easier it's easier said than done. I'm watching the fight. We're all watching the fight. So we're always throwing out our suggestions. What the fighters are actually experiencing in the ring are often a totally different reality, to where advice that we think might be helpful to the fighter would be hell no. If you saw this and this and this, you would realize why I couldn't throw a uppercut at certain times. But it just looked like an uppercut could be effective just based on Brian Castano's high guard coming in. But yeah, he had landed a right uppercut to Castano, and he threw a left hook on top of that, right? And then the left hook hit the ear, kind of upper side-ish, back of the side, head area. And then Castano took a second and then fell forward. And it was crazy because the way that he fell forward, and it seemed like it was at least a half a second after the punch landed, I'm watching this and I'm seeing him fall forward. The crowd's going crazy, but I'm not sure if he's got a bad ankle or something, if he got injured or something. But then, after seeing him lay down and the way that he was slowly getting up, I'm like, oh my God, this is it. Because that once Castano's that damn hurt, because Castano's been resilient through this whole 12 rounds plus 22 rounds versus Jermell Charlo. Yes, he did get wobbled a couple times in the first fight and got rocked a couple times in the second fight. But man, to see him go down like that after all of this competitive fighting between these two guys, you knew that this rivalry was coming to a head right here. And it was, damn, that was dramatic. But yeah, let me know what you thought about Jermell Charlo versus Brian Castano 2 in the comments. I look forward to talking with you guys soon. And please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.